Lori here. I'm here today to do my May reading wrap up for the non-middle grade books that I wound up reading in the month of May. I'm going to split this filming into two parts. I'm going to film half of this on Memorial Day and then the other half on the Saturday at the end of the month because I still have about a week left and I don't know what books I'm going to read, but they're all going to be non-middle grade so that this book wrap up will be a little bit easier, unless if I read Keeper of the Lost Cities, which then I'll just toss that into here. But I am, at the time of this filming, I've read 6 non-middle grade books, and we're going to dive into that first. The first book I'm going to chat through is an adult read, and it is by Robin Hobb, and it's The Assassin's Apprentice. This is book 1 in the Farseer trilogy. This book was one that I liked, but I didn't wind up loving. I wound up giving it only 3 stars, but the writing style with this book did not capture me as much as I was expecting it to, and it basically follows this young boy Fitz, and he is the bastard of Prince Chivalry, and you will kind of follow him from when he's young as 6 to like when he's 15, but he's basically trained to be an assassin. And I just struggled with the point of view a little bit because you have Fitz telling you the story when he's very, very old, so he's not like a reliable narrator, and I sometimes got a little bit lost in the details and in the world. But I liked it. I didn't love it. And I was like, oh, maybe adult reads aren't for me. But I realized, thanks to my netbook, it was more of a problem with the way the story was told. Like her writing style. But I'm going to give book 2 a chance. It's right there, right behind me. But I liked it. I didn't love it. So I only wound up giving up this book 3 stars. And it was probably my least favorite read of the month. Not because I didn't like the world, not because I didn't like the characters, just because I struggled a little bit with the writing style. The next book I wound up reading was another adult read, and that was The Queen's Poisoner by Jeff Wheeler, and this book I adored. This was another book that I picked up from Reagan's channel, Reagan from Peruse Project, and I actually wound up loving this book. I got this book on Kindle, like my Prime membership, for free, but boy, would I have bought the whole entire series because I love book 1. Basically, it follows this young boy named Owen. He's 6, and he's basically taken as a prisoner of war once his older brother is killed. And you follow this whole book from Owen's point of view, and he is just such a sweet character. He's 8. He starts at 5 and think he goes to like 8 in this book. But oh my goodness, I loved being in his head. I loved seeing everyone interact with him. I loved him so much. The magic system in this book is fountain blessed, so we kind of focused on that. We focused on him being a political prisoner. We just focused on him trying to make sure that everything made sense, and I just thought it was such a fun read. I definitely have to ring the King's The Daughter of the Traitor soon, which is the second book. I did get the audiobooks. I might wind up listening to it this month, but it was so fun. I love this book series so much. Like I really, really liked it. I love the narrator. I love the world building. I love the characters. I thought it was another read that just captured me from page 1. And maybe it was the simplicity of the writing style because Owen is so little, but it definitely captured me, and I really, really liked it. If you're like struggling with me to like adult series, I would really start with this one because Owen is basically like a middle grade character. So like I think I think the next book, if I remember correctly, it jumps 10 years, so you'll see Owen when he's like 18. But yeah, really, really liked it. So happy to read book 2, and I was really happy that I finally wound up picking it up and that I was motivated to pick it up. The next book I am going to chat about is another one that I was really excited about, and that is The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow. This one, the tagline got me. Can their love of books and pop music save the world? This is a YA science fiction novel that has a dystopian twist. It basically follows these 2 characters named Ellie and Morris. Ellie is a young girl living in New York City, and all positive things are basically locked down. There's no music, there's no reading because aliens have taken over the universe. But so that's one point of view, and she has a secret library that she gives out to her friends or her people to kind of give them something to hope for. And then the other point of view is an alien named Morris who loves music. And they wind up joining forces on a path to save the people, I guess, and it was just so fun. I really loved it. I love the characters. I love how this book really focused on arts and music as an inspiration point and as a resistance element. I thought there were so many fun quotes about this book about the power of reading and the power of music. I'll definitely be keeping this arc, but I will say this, the end was a little bit rushed. I will say that. The ending was like a little bit rushed, but it also does have a pretty big cliffhanger, so this will be hopefully book 1 in a series. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wound up giving it 4.5 stars for a review. And then the next book I am going to chat about is, this is the audiobook that I read, and this is Tales of the Shadowhunter Academy by Cassie Clare. This is a reread for me, however. Time I've read this anthology in my life. I read it first when it first came out as an audio, as an ebook, and then I've listened to all of them again, and then this is my third time listening to them. This is definitely my favorite collection of short stories that Cassie Clare has ever written because I love Simon as a main character, but I was told to reread this because it did have some elements that are going to be important for Chain of Gold because you see all those characters as young little kids, and I think that that's very, very true. But I just love this series because it focuses on Simon. Simon's one of my favorite characters in the entire Mortal Instrument universe, and I love this series so much. The last story is so heartbreaking. I think I have not listened to it at normal speed or read it since I knew what happened, but I love this series, and I was so happy that I finally got to reread it. And if all goes according to plan, I will be reading Chain of Gold in June, which is amazing. But this is definitely one of my favorite anthologies that Cassie Clare has ever written, even though Ghost of the Shadow Market is a very, very close second, but nothing can take away how much I love Simon. The next book that I wound up finishing was Tale as Old as Time, the twisted tale that is based on Beauty and the Beast. This series, but basically every twisted tale answers a question, and the question that this book answered and asked was, what if Belle's mother cursed the beast? I actually wound up really liking this book. The one thing I love about Twisted Tales is that it really dives into the heads of your female and male characters, and you kind of learn a lot more about them. This book was had a very unexpected ending because it didn't end the same way that I was expecting it to end. So it really could have a total sequel. Well, what happens after that happens? But I thought that the magic system in this book was super well developed. I really liked getting in Belle's head. I loved getting in the prince's head. I love learning more about Mrs. Potts and Chip and their whole background. I just really wound up liking it. I wound up giving it 4 stars. These are books that I wound up reading super fast because I am just so familiar with the story, but especially for Beauty and the Beast because it's one of my favorite Disney's classics. I just loved it. So I was really happy that I wound up getting around to reading it, and I wound up giving it 4 stars for review. And then the next book that I wound up reading, and the last one that I'm going to talk about in this little part, is Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levasseur. This is her newest book. It's a standalone novel, which is kind of like Warrior in the Wild. But guys, this one really surprised me as well. It basically follows this girl named Alessandra, and it is her goal to marry the king because that is her goal. She's very, very ambitious, very, very cunning. She is your perfect Slytherin princess, I'll say that. But her job is to not only marry the king, but also to kill him. And that's kind of her whole plan throughout this book. It's also a very, very sex positive novel. I'll say that. There's a lot of talk about sexuality and sex and, why women and men have different standards. But I just wound up flying through this book. It's not that long, but I flew through it. I also like that it did have elements of letter writing. I like that the magic system was really unique and really different. I wish the magic system had been expanded a little bit and incorporated more of the world, but it was very, very fun and very, very engaging. The mystery was not one I would have necessarily predicted. I wish the ending was a little bit more fleshed out because I felt like it was super rushed, especially the very end. But I wound up really liking it, and I wound up giving this read 4 stars. So those are all the books I'm going to talk about in this part. When you guys see me again, it will be the very end of the week, and I will have hopefully read a few more books. But I'll talk to you guys then. Bye. I'm back. I'm here to complete this wrap up. It is now the 30th of May, which is at the end of the month, so I wanted to tell you guys the last couple of books that I wound up finishing. It is entirely possible I will finish a book before the end of the month, but if that does happen, I will just toss it in to my next wrap-up that I do for June. So, the first book that I wound up finishing was Reflection, A Twisted Tale by Elizabeth Lim, I think. But here's a picture. The fourth Twisted Tale that I read, and I think right now this is probably my least favorite, and it really has nothing to do with the book. I've said this before in a couple of my videos. I sometimes struggle with big epic battle scenes, and that really was what a majority of this book was. So I think I struggled with that a little bit more than I would have liked. I also was doing it during a readathon, and I don't think this was like the best choice for a readathon book because it wasn't as quick paced. But basically the question that this book tackles is, what if Mulan had to go to the underworld? And that's kind of the question that kind of frames this book. So she kind of goes to the underworld and she kind of goes on an adventure to save, I guess, the guy she likes, but she doesn't know that at the time. But I wound up liking it. I liked the self-discovery aspect of this book a lot more. I do feel like we did get to learn about Mulan a lot more. We also got to learn about her family dynamics a little bit more. I do have Before the Sword, which is the tie-in novel to the movie from Disney that I hope to read before I see the movie, but I don't know when that's going to happen. But I wound up giving this book 3 stars. I did like it. I just don't think it was like my favorite read, but I definitely was more invested in like the self-discovery elements. So the next book that I found up finishing was The Mall by Megan McCaffrey. This is another book date that got pushed. It is from Wednesday Books, but it did get pushed to August. So this book follows a girl named Cassie. It is set in 1991, which is awesome. This book combines some of my favorite tropes: self-discovery, rekindled female friendship, a quest or a mystery type element, and also a blast from the past friendship and a job. So basically, Cassie is in her senior summer before she goes to college. And one day her world kind of like blows up. Like she loses her boyfriend, she loses her job, all this other stuff. And she winds up getting an unexpected job for the summer. Also, she's having a lot of like family issues, and literally this whole book takes place in the mall in the 90s, and it was just such a great read. I really, really loved it. I've said this before, I love chapters when they're like titled. I think that that's such a fun twist. But I wound up really liking this book. This book definitely dealt with a lot of like self-discovery topics. I also thought it really handled friendship really, really well. Friendship was definitely at the heart of this book. There is a romantic element to this book, but I don't think that's like the main plot point of this. I wouldn't go in saying that this would be like a fun summer contemporary. I mean, it is a fun summer contemporary, but not the romantic stuff. But it was just like a fun read. I wound up giving this 4 stars. I wound up flying through it. I grew up in the 90s, so it was a nice flashback to see like B. Dalton and Sam Goody. But this one was definitely a fun read. And I actually got through this book pretty quickly. So I wound up giving up this book 4 stars for review. And I'm definitely going to check out her other books. She has another series that I'm like intrigued by, but I hadn't heard of her before. So check out for my review when it comes out in late August, because I think I'm on a blog tour for this, if I'm remembering correctly. The next book was one that took me a while, but I loved it. So this is Bonecryer's Moon by Catherine Purdy. This is the Owl Crate book for the month of April. This book was really intense. Like, it is... And they also do have a preview for the next book, which you never get. This book is like close to 500 pages. I think it's like 450. But I wound up loving this book. Like, it took me a while. It took me like all week to read. I think I started it Wednesday. So like Wednesday to Friday, it took me a long time to read, but that's because the world was so complicated. I really am so close to giving this book like 5 stars. I would probably give it 4.75 stars, honestly, but basically it follows these 3 point of views, and they are farriers. Farriers are people that basically lead the dead to like where they're gonna be, heaven or hell, but they're called different things in this book. So you follow Annalise, who is going to be the next farrier, her best friend Sabine, and Bastian. Bastian's dad was killed by the farrier, by the Bonecryers, which is what they're called. Elise is the matron's daughter, and Sabine is Elise's best friend. But basically, this book starts off with Catherine trying to go through her first trial to basically become a Bonecryer. and things go horribly wrong. But the highlight of this book was definitely the characters. I really enjoyed the world building. The pacing was very, very well crafted. It was a very, very rich and really intense world that I really needed to focus on. So I literally watched no TV this week because this was like definitely a show that like I really had to read straight through, or a book I had to read straight through. I thought the book was very, very well paced, but there were some things that I wish had been explained a little bit more. Like, especially towards the end, there was one plot twist that kind of came out of nowhere. I really enjoyed the plot twist though, and I know we're definitely getting a sequel. So I wound up really, really liking this book. I was super impressed. Probably one of my favorite reads of the month, if I'm being honest. But definitely really, really close to like a 5-star read. There was just one plot twist that I wish had been like set up a little bit. But yeah, really, really wound up liking it. Definitely Sabine is a new favorite character of mine. There's also a lot of side characters in this book that I loved. And I was super impressed with them. I broke my streak. I did wind up reading another middle grade book, but I did wind up finishing that today. And that was Maya and the Rising Dark. This was not the book I was planning on reading, but my mom picked it for me. So yeah, this one is a comic. It has a Comic-Con element, which is why I read it, because I cannot go to BookCon this year. So, but it basically follows this girl named Maya, and she is thrust into a war with the darkness when her father is kidnapped, and it has to do with mythology, friendship, adventuring, quests, and myths. It was a very, very fun read. I don't think it was my favorite mythology book that I've ever read, but I was super impressed with like the diversity of it. And it was just a book that really like I enjoyed. I don't think the pacing was as strong, but I really did like the characters. I thought the parents had a nice saying. It does take place in downtown Chicago, so I think that it also played into that. But I found it to be a fun read. It's not like my new favorite read, but it was one that I really liked. And this cover is very, very pretty. This date also did get pushed. It's not coming out in May. It's coming out in September, but I wound up really liking this one. The last book I'm going to talk about is an audiobook, and it's not something that I normally read, but I wanted to share it because I did wind up reading it. And it's the YouTuber Angela Braniff, her new novel called Love Beyond Borders. I've been watching the last couple of years, like the last year since I've started teaching. I've been actually following a lot of like family vloggers, and my theory about that is because whenever I'm doing like grades or whenever I'm doing stuff for school and I need a lot of background noise, I do have these channels on. So this is one YouTuber that I wound up following, and her family is like does homeschool, and she's very, very involved in adoption. She's adopted like 4 kids, and I just like that. I think that that's like her life is just so fascinating to me. So she wound up writing a book, and this is the first book I think out of 2 she's gonna write, but this basically follows her life up until this point. I loved hearing the story from her words. It wasn't like it because I've watched all her videos, I feel like I knew a lot of this information, but I do think that like it was nice. Like I listened to the audiobook. I was really happy her reading it to me. There was a couple of things that like I was like, well, that I've never heard that before, but a lot of the stuff was like basically doing her videos in like a different format, I would say. Like it was one continual story. Um it is very, very focused on religion. They're like a Christian household, which I normally don't mind. I didn't feel like it was that overpowering, but I really did like the elements talking about the various adoptions she was involved in. That I think was like the highlight for me. But I found it really, really fun. I think as an audiobook, I think it definitely helped me because she was reading it. I don't think I would have liked it as much as I've read it physically, but I wound up liking it. I'm still following her on YouTube, so that's great. But that's all the books that I wound up finishing for the month of May that were like mostly not middle grade. I've been having such a good like reading year, and I think that's mostly thanks to quarantine because I really can't do much other than like read. And I know a lot of other people are having so many issues focusing, and reading is not what they're gravitating towards. But for some reason I am, and I'm really, really grateful of that. But yeah, so I hope that you guys are staying safe and being well, and I'm excited to share with you guys at the end of June what I wound up reading, because at this point, who knows? But let me know in the comments what are some books that you wound up really, really liking this month, and I'll talk to you guys later for another video. Bye.